Hi, I'm Richard Ashworth. I'm here to talk to you about hexagram number 14 today, which is this guy. Good idea to have one of these in front of you. The Most people have the Wilhelm edition of the Book of Changes, which is a textbook, and it's the basis for knowledge about the Book of Changes. But if you're using the Book of Changes, the I Ching, the Yi, as a divination tool to find out what's going on, to ask it questions, I would recommend the Yi Jing, Y-I one word, Jing, J-I-N-G, of Wu, W-U, Jing, J-I-N-G, Nuan. Quite hard to find, but what's great about it is that it tells you nothing. In other words, it allows you to do the work. It gives you the translation of the Chinese characters, but not more than that. So let's have a little bit of a look at this hexagram. Have it in front of you, ideally. The top trigram, this guy, these three, that's fire. The second daughter, illumination over the creative, fire over heaven. So it's giving you a picture of creativity. It's giving you a picture of power, perhaps a picture of wealth, something of that sort. There is only one yin line, which makes this a very unusual hexagram. In fact, there are, I can't remember what number, 5 or 6 hexagrams called Da, meaning great, and they're all funny shapes. But this one is unique in that we have just the one yin line at the 5th, here at the 5th, which is very often the ruling line, because it is very often either the most powerful, the best, or the most typical. And in this case, it's very distinctive because this yin line, which is as it sounds, it's in the wrong place, but it is flexible, and it is central. When I say it's in the wrong place, a yin line should be an even numbered line, which is neither here nor there. But what it means is it is dependent upon all of these guys for power. And interestingly or not, when I was learning the hexagrams of the Book of Changes, I was actually playing Father Christmas at Debenhams at the time, and I'd be sitting there looking very benevolent, and I'd actually be working out mnemonics for the Book of Changes to remember the hexagrams. And the way that I remembered hexagram 14 was by Louis XIV, the Sun King, number 14, because this is fire over heaven. But there's a whole many parallels that come out of looking at it as Louis XIV. So if you'll bear with me, I'll elaborate on that in a minute. The things you need to know. There is correspondence, if you like, connection between the 2nd and the 5th. That happens if we have a yin here or a yang here and the reverse here. So we have yang here and yin there. This is the emperor, the king, the person in charge, the ruler. This is the people. This is his ambassador or her ambassador, her representative. So is that this line is kind of reporting back to that line, if you like. So there is this thing about the king being in touch or not with the will of the people. The host is the 5th, as I said. The picture, the image, which I won't show you, is of someone stretching to full height, a hand holding sacrificial meat and or obscuring the moon. So some connection between sacrifices and moons, which is probably old beyond measure. The nuclear of this, that is to say, the origins of this problem. And the point of my talking to you today, which I hadn't actually said, is to firstly give you some ideas of what it might mean if you've drawn this hexagram, including the various changing lines, what they might mean. Secondly, to draw from it the timeless wisdom, which is always there. And thirdly, to look at how this might relate to the situation we are in now. And this hexagram relates on the Chinese compass, the lopan, to the metal snake, which corresponds to the month of May 2025. So there are wheels within wheels within wheels here. Anyway, my mnemonic was 14, Louis XIV, whose reign was called the Ancien Regime, the old regime, and it was a peak of power, a peak of privilege, a peak of wealth, and obviously very fragile as a result. the whole thing fell apart in 1789. He reigned until 1715, from 1643 to 1715. I think, is that even longer than Queen Elizabeth II? It's close anyway. But the whole thing fell apart in 1789 in a a very bloodthirsty way. And if you've ever visited the gardens at Versailles and seen the fittings there, you can see what kind of sumptuous luxury he lived in. So this hexagram 14 is very interesting in dealing with the peak of power, the peak of abundance, but the fragility of it, that one lone yin line surrounded by yang. They might support one day and cut your head off the next. And as his successor, Louis XV, said, après moi le déluge, after me the flood. In other words, he knew it couldn't hold together. The wealth was only concentrated in the hands of the ruler as long as the rest of the population allowed it. A yin fifth line is, I suggest, inherently vulnerable. It does, however, speak of a ruler, and we may be talking about a managing director, we may be talking about a boss, we may even be talking about a spouse, but we're talking in some sense someone whose will is very important in your own life, but usually a superior of some sort. Someone who is smart enough to place representatives among the people at the lower lines and to listen to their advisors, because again, this yin line has an advisor here, which is a connection with God, probably an ideological or religious advisor, Archbishop of Canterbury, Pope kind of figure. And this one is kind of Chamberlain, Prime Minister, or whatever. But this character here is smart enough to cooperate with them, but deeply fragile because there is so much yang and so little yin. And there is this idea of the divine right of kings. And in point of fact, the French monarchy, they were the first ones to be anointed. Charlemagne was anointed by Alcuin of York in 799, if I remember rightly. But there's this idea was the king couldn't do any wrong, which is a very, very fragile structure. So the mission statement ascribed to Louis XIV himself on the subject of the role of the kings is "L'État, c'est moi." L'État, c'est moi. That is, the state is me. And I'm drawing your attention to the fact that there are parallels for this right now. The idea that there is no distinction between what the ruler thinks is right or good and what is actually right or good and what is actually law. And we live in a time when there are rulers who are confusing themselves with the infallible, confusing themselves with having been divinely anointed, which will tend to lead to mistakes and ultimately to tears, I suggest. And Louis was confused clearly between the agreement under which governance is passed upwards with the infallibility of the recipient. I'm not sure if that is clear. He thought he couldn't make a mistake. These guys in this position, however this relates to your life at this moment, or however this relates to the world at the moment, there are people out there in ruling positions who think they can't make a mistake. And that is a very dangerous situation. Anyway, these lines can all change, as you will know. When the fifth line changes, we have Qian, the creative. In other words, when this fifth line changes, they will all be yang. So it's a kind of a return to God at that point. So this is a temporary structure because we have this energy climbing up like this to this point. Where this one changes, it is a return to God. And interpret that as you will. So again, if you have thrown this, it may mean that you are thrown upon your conscience. It may mean that at some point, whatever you're wrestling with is going to come before a committee, but before a ruler, before witnesses, something like that. And you're in a fragile position, is what this implies. Taking the other lines one by one, we can see this tendency rising from the foot of the hexagram to the top. It is a supremely advantageous augury, this wealth, this abundance, this fabulous privilege, this sumptuousness, but it is a fragile one. The first line is of course yang and therefore firm, as well as appropriately positioned at the beginning of things. It should be there, but it's not central, meaning it doesn't follow the middle path. And when we're confronted with such a mix, we need to look for nuance. Is this statement of fact, warning, or instruction? So is it saying that it's in the wrong place, saying that it may be moving to the wrong place, saying that it should move? Those are the things to consider. Remember, by the way, that these are not, I suggest, words from on high, but an expression of what we know already and may not be in contact with. This line suggests the beginnings of big change. The test to apply, of course, is to change the line and see what results. In this case, we get fire over wind, ding, the cauldron, if we change that first line. The cauldron represented in the ideograph is the one used in Chinese tradition in the ceremony when the divine right to rulers passes from dynasty to dynasty. So the first line already is talking about this situation of rule changing. In the Bible, from Saul to David, Saul being the first divinely anointed king. Sorry, forgive the history. Not everyone's a history nerd like me. In his introduction to the Wilhelm edition of the Book of Changes, a very good edition, but as I say, not for the diviner, more for the academic, Carl Gustav Jung takes the text of Ding to be about the reception of Chinese culture in the West as it was gradually being released in the 1920s when he was writing. It's a time to celebrate an integration, but the mandate of heaven, Tianming, is an elusive thing. How does a potential replacement of the king know when to rise up? For the Zhou, who supplanted the Shang in 1053 BC, it was when all 5 visible planets were simultaneously on display. The catch is that you only know you have the mandate when you're in power. If your coup fails, you don't. Simple as that. So there is this thing about welcoming the integration between European and Chinese culture, say, but a lack of awareness of what that might actually mean in Jung's text. As I've written before, the configuration of ding, fire over wind, is suspect anyway. It's preceded by ko, generally translated as revolution, but currently often referred to poignantly, possibly mischievously, as reform. And ko's structure, lake over fire, is a clash. It's implicitly violent. From the standpoint of 2025, Jung's take may seem naive. We might equally note that Hexagram 14's predecessor, the one before it, that is number 13, that is arguably its cause is Tongren, hexagram 13, usually termed union of men, but consisting of, note the words, heaven on fire. And perhaps more importantly, the line is firm and correct, but not central, not on track, not right, not doing the right stuff. Only a change will redirect it. And that's the message, I think, whether we're talking about globally, in commerce, in your family, in your business, and your relationship, there is something about the balance of power that is very, very delicate. The second line represents the people at large, down the bottom, and the king or emperor's emissaries among them, and it leads to lei, number 30, enlightenment or clarity, consisting of fire over fire. This could be a road to Damascus moment, a blazing light that cannot be ignored. It is firm, it is incorrect, and it's central, but it has a hotline to the top person. This surely is a recommendation not to change. Right now, illumination is the issue. The questioner probably has enough information to be making plans. This line perhaps leads to a useful outcome by an unconscious route. It may be that we're to trust the general thrust of things for now. Line 2 is still early on. Serendipity perhaps, no sudden moves, but a reminder to stay in touch with the top table is implied. You are the informant, correspondent, roving reporter that keeps the ruler's feet on the ground. Line 3 is, of course, atop the lower trigram, and therefore neither one thing nor the other. It's halfway through. It is again firm, again correct, but this time not central. The changed line will give us fire over lake, hexagram 38, diversity or perversity. It was a very uncertain, odd, kind of supernatural hexagram. I sometimes call it the will-o'-the-wisp or the flibbity-gibbet. There's fire over a lake. What's fire doing over a lake? The questioner may find guidance in their own circumstances, but there is a temptation to take diversity as a political issue. Trust your own judgment. I should. What does this mean to you? What does that image mean to you in this circumstance? Beware the restlessness that leads to premature action, because it is not settled. It's all over the place. A jack-o'-lantern, if you will. The fourth line, firm, incorrect, not central, has the ear of the emperor because he's next to her. An executive rather than a decision maker. There's only ever been one female emperor in the 7th century, one of the most effective emperors they had. She was not empress, she was an emperor. Why am I saying that? The fourth line has the ear of the emperor, an executive rather than a decision maker, possibly the executive with a big E rather than the legislative, so we're possibly talking about current politics. They are the bad cop to the king's good cop, the fourth line. They may have to take responsibility for nasty decisions. I mean, generally that's what rulers do. They have their subordinates take the slack, don't they? Carry the rap. The ruler at the fifth depends upon the fourth's potential for harshness. So the ruler can be gentle and kind of benevolent and, all things to all men, while their servant is out there kicking. Politicians and monarchs, like politicians, tend to reserve jobs, bestowing carrots for themselves and the stick to their subordinates. So again, perhaps you're in this situation where you're being required to, I don't know, declare people redundant or pass on bad news, that you're being asked to say the things that the people who are making the decisions want you to say rather than them, so that you will be unpopular rather than them. How this dynamic has expressed itself globally or in your immediate circumstances may be worth consideration. Are you doing someone else's dirty work? Depending on your place in the food chain, it may be that you've delegated your own dirty laundry. Is that all right with you? Is it even conscious? It was George Orwell who wrote that people sleep peaceably in their beds at night only because rough men stand ready to do violence on their behalf. And I write to someone who's done work unofficially in government offices and for higher-ups in the SAS. The change is to another Da, hexagram, number 26, great opportunity, Da Chu, where Gen the mountain, that is the youngest son, has come to dominate Qian the creative, which is unusual. This artificial situation cannot last. The youngest son cannot control his father for long. Some would say it calls for the questioner to seize the day. Carpe diem does not mean fish of the day. For myself, I usually think of it as getting major ducks into a row, a time both of planning and subsequent action. This seems in character with the fragile prosperity of the Gua. Hexagram 9, Shao Chu, waiting, of course, treats with smaller ducks, a kind of dress rehearsal. Line 5 is the punchline, the denouement. This is possibly, with the exception of the Yang fifth line of hexagram B, union, the most fragile, defining line of any hexagram. We may have an illustration of this fragility in the Brexit vote. Unity is hard to build and easy to break, but it may also be to do with other types of relationship, whether intimate relationship, close relationships, relationships with your children, relationships with your colleagues, relationships with your employees, but most likely employers. It just takes one line change to change it from unity to something dissipated. And that line, of course, is the ruling one. As Chuck Pisano says, it only takes one to tango, but it has to be you. In some kind of sequence, perhaps, the change is to Qian the creative, as I said earlier. It is, in fact, the process of successively nucleating any hexagram takes you to either Qian or Kun, the receptive, or to alteration, which is a technical thing. I won't harp on that. It's saying, if you know how to calculate the nuclear, it will show you the way that the roots of events just keep repeating themselves, go back and forth between events that are each other's opposites. The sixth line is traditionally above it all. It represents connection, if not to God, religious systems and the gods of ideology, nationalism, liberalism, neoliberalism, fascism perhaps. Capital letter notions, big N for neoliberalism. Its job, like the fourth and third, is to inform the ruler, big R. It changes to thunder over heaven, Dazhuang, great strength. Powerful, but like 14, fragile. Arriving at the top of the heap presents only one future. It may be that we're being asked to consider how we get off our high horse. Do we just let go? Admitting we were wrong is hard for most of us and often impossible for politicians, but it may be the issue here. It may be the key to your current dilemma. Do we all have that in common at this point? The heart of healing is forgiveness. The heart of forgiveness is responsible communication. We get the rulers we ask for, perhaps those we deserve, and that goes for every aspect of the human condition. I hope this has been of use to you and not too desperately obscure. If you want to attend the sessions that these are edited highlights of, you can join us for a year at a time. Just Google Richard Ashworth and I'm sure you'll find me, Richard Ashworth Feng Shui. And these highlights appear on my YouTube channel month by month, and the next one will appear sometime in June. But as I say, you can attend the actual session early in June if you were to email us and organise that. So thank you for listening if you did, for lasting this long, and I will talk to you again very soon, I'm sure. Thank you. Bye-bye.